How's it going, YouTube? Before I get into the video, let me remind you, if you like my content, hit that like and subscribe button. And also, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. Okay, before I get into the video, let me throw a disclaimer out there. The commander for this particular deck is a commander that Wizards will not reprint again because of sensitive content. So if you're kind of sensitive to that kind of stuff, I would suggest that you fast forward past it. The title of the video will tell you who the commander is. So if you're not into the art, then definitely fast forward past this part. So today we're going to take a look at Gwendlyn de Corci. I've always wanted to build a deck around this card. I always thought that this card was very interesting in the sense that I personally thought the art was very unique, in the sense that I also thought that the character here was being very creative, and I do see now how that can be taken very wrong. But anyway, Gwendlyn de Corci is a 3/5 legend for 1 red, 2 black, and a blue. You can tap this and target player discards 1 card from his or her hand at random. You can only do that at sorcery speed. So we're going to take a look at the rest of the deck here. Starting with creatures, we got Aclazot's Deepest Betrayal. This is 3 and 2 black for a 4/4 with flying and lifelink. When Aclazot attacks, each opponent discards a card. For each opponent who can't, you draw a card. And whenever an opponent discards a land card, create a 1/1 black creature token with flying. And when Aclazot dies, return it to the battlefield tapped, transformed under its owner's control. It comes back as a land. We'll show that real quick here. Temple of the Dead. You can tap this for black. You can pay 2 and a black and tap this and transform. Temple of the Dead. Activate only if an opponent if a player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, and only as a sorcery. All right, next up is going to be Burglar Rats. This is 1 and a black for a 1/1. When Burglar Rats enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. Got Dauthi Voidwalker for 2 black. This is a 3/2 with Shadow. If a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, instead exile it with a void counter on it. You can tap this and sacrifice Dauthi Voidwalker to choose an exiled card an opponent owns with a void counter on it. You may play that card this turn without paying its mana cost. Fell Spectre for 3 and a black. This is a 1/3 with flying. When Fell Spectre enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. Next up is Hypnotic Spectre for 1 and 2 black. This is a 2/2 with flying. Whenever Hypnotic Spectre deals damage to an opponent, that player discards a card at random. Got Kroza, Titan of Death's Hunger. This is 1 black, 1 red for a 6/6. When Kroza enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escaped. When Kroza enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent discards a card. Then each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card this way loses 3 life. It escapes for 2 black and 2 red. Got Lavaborn Muse for 3 and a red. This is a 3/3 at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep. If that player has 2 or fewer cards in hand, Lavaborn Muse deals 3 damage to him or her. Magus of the Wheel for 2 and a red. This is a 3/3 for 1 and a red. You can tap and sacrifice Magus of the Wheel. Each player discards his or her hand and then draws 7 cards. We have Nicobolas, the Ravager, for 1 a blue, a black, and a red. This is a 4/4 with flying. When Nicobolas, the Ravager, enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. You can also pay 4 a blue, a black, and a red to exile Nicobolas, the Ravager, then return him to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. Activate this ability only when you could cast a sorcery. Okay, he returns as Nicobolas the Arisen. This is a Planeswalker which enters with 7 loyalty. For +2, you can draw 2 cards. For -3, Nicobolas the Arisen deals 10 damage to target creature or Planeswalker. For -4, put target creature or Planeswalker card from graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And for -12, exile all but the bottom card of target player's library. -12 is kind of nasty. Alright, next up we have Notion Thief for 2, a blue, and a black. This is a 3/1 with flash. If an opponent would draw a card, except for the first one they draw each of their draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card. Orcish Bowmasters for 1 and a black. This is a 1/1 with flash. When Orcish Bowmasters enters the battlefield, and whenever an opponent draws a card, except for the first one they draw each of their draw steps, Orcish Bowmaster deals 1 damage to any target, then amass 1 orc. Sorry, amass orcs 1. Rankle Master of Pranks for 2 and 2 black. This is a 3/3 with flying and haste. Whenever Rankle Master of Pranks deals combat damage to a player, choose any number. Each player discards a card. Each player loses 1 life and draws a card. Each player sacrifices a creature. Next up is Singermancer. This is 2 and 2 black for a 3/3 with flying. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you may gain 3 life. Whenever an opponent discards a card, you may gain 3 life. Sidrax's Spectre for 1 blue, 1 black, and 1 red. This is a 3/2 with flying. When Sidrax's Spectre deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card, and it has Unearth for 1 and a black. Shieldred the Apocalypse for 2 and 2 black. This is a 4/5 with Death Touch. Whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. Got Turgid, God of Fright. This is 3 and 2 black for a 4/5 with Menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It also has a backside, which is Turgid's Lantern. You can tap this and have target player lose 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card, and you may pay 3 and a black to untap Turgid's Lantern. Next up we have the Haunt of Hightower. This is 4 and 2 black for a 3/3 with flying and lifelink. Whenever the Haunt of Hightower attacks, defending player discards a card. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Haunt of Hightower. The Raven Man for 1 and a black. This is a 2/1. At the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card this turn, create a 1/1 blackbird creature token with flying, and this creature can't block. For 3 and a black, you can tap this and each opponent discards a card, activate only as a sorcery. Tiny Bones Trinket Thief for 1 and a black. This is a 1/2. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent discards a card, this turn you draw a card and lose a life. For 4 and 2 black, each opponent with no cards in hand loses 10 life. And then finally, Torok Dread Cantor for 1 and a black. It has Kicker for 2 black. It has Protection from white. It is a 2/1. Whenever an opponent discards a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Torok the Dread Cantor. Dread Cantor. Whenever Turok enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target opponent discards 2 cards at random. Alright, next up is Instants. We're going to start with a Chaos Warp for 2 and a red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into his or her library, then reveals the top card of his or her library. If it is a permanent card, he or she puts it onto the battlefield. We get Counterspell for 2 blue, counter target spell. Cyclonic Rift for 1 and a blue, return target permanent, a non-land permanent an opponent controls to their hand, and it has Overload for 6 and a blue. Dark Ritual for 1 black, add 3 black to your mana pool. Dream Salvage for 1 blue-black hybrid. Draw cards equal to the number of cards target opponent discarded this turn. Drown in the Loch for 1 blue and 1 black. Choose 1 counter target spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands in its controller's graveyard. Or destroy target creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Got Mana Drain for 2 blue. Counter target spell. At the beginning of your next main phase, add an amount of colorless equal to the spell's mana value. Mystical Tutor for 1 blue. Search your library for an instant or sorcery card. Reveal that card. Shuffle your library, then put that on top. Vampiric Tutor for 1 black. Search your library for a card. Shuffle your library, put that card on top, and then lose 2 life. Next up is sorceries. Starting with Blasphemous Act for 8 and a red. This spell costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield. Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. Burning Inquiry for 1 red. Each player draws 3 cards, then discards 3 cards at random. Damnation for 2 and 2 black. Destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. Dark Deal for 2 and a black. Each player discards all cards in his or her hand, then draws that many cards -1. Demonic Tutor for 1 and a black. Search your library for a card. Put that card into your hand, then shuffle. Mnemonic Betrayal for 1 a blue and a black. Exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards. You may cast those cards this turn. You may spend mana as though it was mana of any type to cast the spells. At the beginning of the next end step, if any of those cards remain exiled, return them to their owner's graveyards. Exile Mnemonic Betrayal. Siphon Mind for 3 and a black. Each other player discards a card. You draw a card for each card discarded this way. Torment of Hailfire for X and 2 black. Repeat the following process X times. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. Toxic Deluge for 2 and a black. As an additional cost to cast this spell, pay X life. All creatures get -X until end of turn. Whispering Madness for 2 a blue and a black. Each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. It has Cipher. And finally, Windfall for 2 and a blue. I think that was finally, yeah. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. Alright, next up is Artifacts. Starting with Arcane Signet. This costs 2. You can tap it for 1 color of your commander's color identity. Dimir Signet costs 2. You can tap 1 and tap this to add blue or black. Geth's Grimoire for 4. Whenever an opponent discards a card from his or her hand, you may draw a card. Is It Signet costs 2. You can pay 1 and tap this for blue-red. Lightning Greaves costs 2. Equipped creature has haste and shroud. Equips for 0. Noetic Scales costs 4. During each player's upkeep, return to owner's hand each creature that player controls with power greater than the number of cards in his or her hand. Patriarch's Seal for 3. You can tap this for 1 mana of any color, or you can pay 1 and tap this to untap target legendary creature you control. Rakdos Signet costs 2. You can pay 1 and tap this for black and red. Soul Ring costs 1. You can tap this for 2 colorless. Talisman of Creativity costs 2. You can tap this for colorless, or you can tap this for blue and red, and Talisman of Creativity deals 1 damage to you. Talisman of Dominance costs 2. You can tap this for colorless, or you can tap this for blue-black, and Talisman of Dominance deals 1 damage to you. And Talisman of Indulgence costs 2. You can tap this for colorless, or you can tap this for black-red, and have Talisman of Indulgence deal 1 damage to you. Okay, next up is Enchantments. So we got Bloodchief Ascension for 1 black. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. When a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. Bottomless Pit for 1 and 2 black. During each player's upkeep, that player discards a card at random. Liliana's Caress for 1 and a black. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. Megrim for 2 and a black. Whenever an opponent discards a card, Megrim deals 2 damage to him or her. Necrogen Mists for 2 and a black. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player discards a card from his or her hand. Oppression for 1 and 2 black. Whenever a player casts a spell, that player discards a card. Painful Quandary for 3 and 2 black. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player loses 5 life unless they discard a card. Quest for the Nilestone for 1 black. Whenever an opponent discards a card, you may put a quest counter on Quest for the Nilestone. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand and Quest for the Nilestone has 2 or more quest counters on it, you may have that player lose 5 life. Raider's Wake for 3 and a black. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. It has Raid at the beginning of the end step. If you attacked with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. Rhystic Study for 2 and a blue. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. Waste Not for 1 and a black. Whenever an opponent discards a creature card, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, add 2 black mana to your mana pool. Whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card. Okay, next up is going to be Planeswalkers. We got Liliana, Waker of the Dead for 2 and 2 black. This starts with 4 loyalty. For +1, each player discards a card. Each opponent who can't loses 3 life. For -3, target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard. And for -7, you get an emblem with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It gains haste. And then we have Narset, Parter of Veils for 1 and 2 blue. Each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. Her -2 says, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. All right, next up is going to be non-basic lands. Starting with Blood Crypt. Blood Crypt is the shock land for black-red. Bloodstained Mire is the fetch land for black-red. Bojuka Bog enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from target player's library. Taps for black. Command Tower taps for commander's color identity. Crumbling Necropolis enters tapped, is a triumph for blue, black, red. Dragon Skull Summit is a check land for black, red. Drowned Catacomb is a check land for blue, black. Exotic Orchard taps for whatever your opponent's lands tap for. Gaia Reach Sanitarium taps for colorless. You can pay 2 and tap this to have each player draw a card, then discard a card. Luxury Suite is the crowd land for black-red. Morphic Pool is the crowd land for blue-black. Polluted Delta is the fetch land for black-blue. Raucous Theater is a surveil land for black-red, and it has basic land typings. Scalding Tarn is a fetch land for blue-red. Shipwreck Marsh is another check land for blue-black. Steam Vents is a shock land for red-blue with basic land types. Stormcarved Coast is a check land for blue-red. Training Center is a crowd land for blue-red. Undercity Sewers is a surveil land for black-blue that has basic land types. Underground River is a pain land for blue-black. Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. Each land is a swamp in addition to its other land types. Watery Grave is a shock land for blue-black with basic land types. And Xander's Lounge is a triumph for blue, black, red that has basic land typings and cycles. Alright, next up is going to be basic lands. We have 1, 2 islands, 1 mountain, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 swamps. Alright, so this is a Gwendlyn to Corci deck. I know that Gwendlyn herself, the art, is sensitive to certain people, and I understand that. The card itself is a card that I chose because when I was very young, I really loved the card. And I told myself if I ever ended up getting the card that I would build the deck. So this is a Gwendlyn to Corci deck. I will show it on screen for a short period of time for those who would like to see, and then pull that back off screen. So basically, yeah, we're just trying to discard everybody's hand. It is control in that sense. At that point, when your opponents have very little resources and all they're working with is their top deck, it pretty much gives you the control to take over the game. Pretty simple. Yeah, so Gwendlyn to Corci. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Keep it positive. I will remove negative comments. And yeah, until next time, guys. Peace.